Hello, everyone, and welcome to our July 2021 MemLab Network webinar. I'm so excited to be talking about the ABCs of TBCs with Morgan Morel, the Director of Preservation from the BAVC, Bay Area Video Coalition, and then also Ben Turkus from New York Public Library, who's the Assistant Manager of Audio and Moving Image Preservation there. So please welcome them, and thank you so much for joining us. And I'm so excited to see your presentation.
Ooh, hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And a special thanks to Siobhan for inviting us to present on this topic that is so near and dear to our hearts. My name is Ben Turkus, as Siobhan said, and Morgan's over there in the bolo tie, if you can't see it. And we're both really excited to be here too, to talk to you about what we consider an integral but often overlooked part of video digitization, the time-based corrector, or TBC. And the way that this presentation will play out, I'm going to hit some of the basics and focus in on the history of TBCs and tell like a super abbreviated origin story for them. And flipping things around, I'm also going to talk about time-based errors. So the things that TBCs were designed to correct, what they look like, what causes them, and why these devices were even created to begin with. I'll then pass it over to Morgan, who will back up and start from the beginning, talking about the complexities of video itself and comparing and contrasting some of the different TBCs that are available to you. And after Morgan wraps up, we'll have some time for Q&A, casual conversation, what have you. But before we get started, some introductions. I work at the New York Public Library, as Siobhan said. And before that, I used to work at the Bay Area Video Coalition. And I even wrote my NYU Moving Image Archiving and Preservation thesis on the topic of time-based correctors. So you could say I've been a bit of a TBC freak from the very beginning, from the moment I started digitizing tapes. And at NYPL, we don't have our own memory lab, but I just wanted to say I'm so deeply inspired and energized by the work that you all do. And I'm really hoping that someday soon, we'll be able to finally get something memory lab going within the kind of universe of NYPL locations in New York City. And Morgan, do you want to say a little bit about why you were interested in this topic?
Let me unmute. Okay, yes, I definitely want to talk about that. So I have sort of, I remember first hearing like the term TBCs when I was just like working back at the Language Resource Center at the University of Michigan. The reason was that we had actually the Language Resource Center being a place where you could get tapes that were kind of language learning resources. There's also a satellite feed from various channels from across the globe that students could tune into. And so they had a broadcast engineer and who happened to be a woman, and she was like a really cool person and would just sort of drop little hints about really cool broadcast engineer stuff. This was before I had even thought about ever going into preservation for a career, but I remember her talking a lot about time-based correctors and how her equipment was dying. And there's all these sort of like kind of preempted all of these different things that I would end up learning about working in this field. But it was always sort of just confusing. It's like, what is the time-based corrector? It was sort of this like word that got floated around. I knew it was important, but I didn't quite understand what it was. And as you know, I've been working hands-on with tape media for about 9 years now. It is slowly but surely coming into focus. So I want to like let you know that if you're confused about time-based correctors, that's okay, because most people are. And really what I want to focus on with my presentation is starting at the very beginning of like what video signal is and the kind of a basic anatomy of it that I feel is actually very important to understanding how a time-based corrector works and why it has to work that way. And additionally, I'm going to talk about try to maybe sort of suss out some terms, time-based corrector, processing amplifier, or proc amp, and frame sync, and try to figure out how to suss out what those are and why they're different and how they're different and how they kind of appear differently in different equipment, because I think that those are terms that sort of get mixed up a little bit. And it's, I want to kind of try to clarify that because they are different and they do different things, but they get kind of bunched together. But yeah, I think that's it for my intro.
Cool.
Also, actually do want to say that my part of this is sort of part of a larger breadth of resources that we're making with funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And if you are interested, what we're trying to do is create these online resources, as well as we're going to have equipment kits that we're sending to people to show them how to use a time-based corrector, how to clean and maintain a deck, how to use a deck, and how to calibrate a CRT monitor, how to read a scope. And if you're interested in being a part of this program and having a kit sent to you, please reach out to me directly at morgan@bavc.org. We really want to get a good group of people to do this program with.
Nice. I love all of these MemoryLab, NEH, BAVC resources. I was saying before we started recording that you all did one earlier this year or last year, I guess, all about a specific model of TBC, the DPS 575. We're not going to talk about it a lot today, but I would strongly encourage you to check out that video, which is on the BAVC website and probably other places as well. Okay, so let me figure out how to change slides. There we go. So thematically, we're going to jump around a bit. Hopefully in reinforcing one another as we go. But our ultimate goal is by the end of this presentation to have answered some of the central questions that often arise when you start to think about TBCs. Why do I need a TBC? Do I always need a TBC? What do all of these buttons and knobs do? How should I connect this thing? How do these things even work? And the question that is really nearly impossible to answer, though we'll do our best to offer a few suggestions for, which TBC is right for me? So in the interest of not losing you before we even begin, here's a basic diagram in which you can see where a TBC would fit in, right? So videotapes are played back on a videotape recorder or VTR. And depending upon the format that you're working with, is it old, is it new, and your desired workflow, the video signal may pass through a separate TBC or frame synchronizer on its way to the computer. So in simplistic terms, bad video goes in, good or at least better video comes out, errors are corrected. But wait, it does get more complicated. TBCs come in two main flavors: external standalone devices like the ones you're seeing here on the right, or processing cards that are inside of your VTR as seen on the left here. And so a good rule of thumb is if your VTR has buttons or knobs that allow you to adjust the video signal, the Luma or the brightness, the blacks, the chroma or intensity of color, and Morgan's going to talk about all of this a bit later. If your VTR has these things, there's a good chance that there's a TBC inside that VTR. So using kind of standard MemoryLab equipment as an example, and I only know this by perusing your amazing online docs and talking to Siobhan, but typically you all use both internal and external TBCs. So the Pixie, that cutie pie on the top right here, is an external TBC. And the Panasonic AG1980, which is a VHS deck that I think you all use pretty regularly, that has an internal TBC. And you can tell this because the 1980 has this little TBC light that turns on, I think, when you pop a tape in. But let's not go too deep on this for the moment and return to our kind of first and central question. Why do you even need a TBC? Here is one reason why you might need a TBC. This is vertical roll or picture roll. I mean, this is just an ugly video on top of everything, but that's a separate conversation. So we'll get into a bit later, but you can already sense that timing is going to be a big piece of this. So what are a few other, maybe less wildly noticeable examples of time-based errors? And in researching this subject on one of my favorite websites, worldradiohistory.com, which is basically like a treasure trove of old trade publications, broadcasting trade publications, I found this incredible article called Time-Based Correction, What It Is, What It Does, from the like 1973 July Broadcast Management Engineering issue. And not only does it open with this kind of hilarious and still timely quote, time-based correction is a television industry term which is broadly and loosely used but little understood. But it follows with this kind of nice breakdown of the various time-based errors that you might encounter. And you can kind of see these here in the apples. Jitter, drift, picture tearing, flag waving, hue shift, skew error, color streaking. These words may not mean much to you, and I would completely understand that. But these are just a few of the time-based errors that can be introduced during the generation, the transmission, the recording, the playback, or any like reprocessing of the video signal. So really like anywhere along the line, time-based errors could be introduced. So if we know what time-based errors look like, I'd imagine your next question would be something like the following. What causes time-based errors, or how do they occur? So in short, time-based errors are most often the result of mechanical instabilities or tape deformation, problems that are really as old as video itself. So this image here from a TBC user manual shows you a bit of how TBCs compensate for these errors when they occur. And again, Morgan's going to talk about this more, but TBCs operate on the basic principle of line-by-line sampling. So analog video is made up of a series of lines, and sync pulses exist. The sync pulses that exist on every line get compared to a stable reference. And if they're off, they get adjusted, typically delayed, to get back in step. And if you've ever looked inside a VTR as a tape is being played, this is a Sony 1/2-inch EIAJ open reel. The idea that something could go wrong in some fashion should make some sense to you. There are so many moving parts and so much is happening at this unbelievable speed. And the key to all of it is precision and synchronization. So thinking about the history of TV and video from the 1950s on, we can start to see how TBCs were kind of the ultimate hedge, right? They were the tolerance built into the system, the recognition on the part of video engineers that video itself, this complex process that has got to operate in near perfect harmony, was never going to work 100% of the time under real world conditions. So rather than expect perfection, why not create mechanisms that anticipate things going awry? Why not acknowledge that things going awry is in some sense inevitable? There are just so many things that can go wrong. And here is one favorite of mine. Wait for it. There you go. This is from BAVC's AV Compass project. Thank you to the Mellon Foundation for funding this amazing educational video. There are many others. I would encourage you to check this out on the BAVC website as well. But extremes aside, there are so many ways, both small and large, that your ability to play back a tape properly could be impacted. And a short but not definitive list would include some of the following: things happening to the tape itself, right? So as we know, tapes break down over time, things get sticky. That could absolutely cause a time-based error. Another broad category would include things happening to the VTR. So over time, video heads, those spinning things that are most responsible for the regeneration of the video, they get worn down. And when that happens, the tape might not pass through the transport in exactly the same way. There are also interchange problems. So differences between the VTR that was used to record a tape and the one that's being used to play back a tape. And then of course, you could even create your own time-based errors by manipulating video, right? So when you're fast forwarding or rewinding a tape, that instability in the image is a form of time-based error. But getting back to the history though, the invention of the quadruplex recorder in 1956, the invention of video itself. Here's me in front of this massive RCA quad machine, and there is a TBC somewhere in that area that I circled, though I could not tell you where at this point in time. But for quad to become the kind of like standard television recording device that its inventors hoped it would be, for it to replace like film-based kinescope for recording TV shows, these timing errors would need to be resolved. And so initial efforts revolved around making the system more precise, but even with various improvements, residual errors were still far too common. And so the first time-based correctors, the first purely electronic means of dealing with time-based errors, these were analog systems. And the very first was created by an engineer in Chicago in like the 50s and 60s. And to offer like a total gloss on a really complex history, it was in the 70s that rapid advancements in signal processing electronics provided new ways to digitize and store TV signals. And this was for correction, but also for other things, right? So for editing, for special effects, and for general manipulation. And so in this way, the story of time-based correction is really the story of advances in neighboring fields, integrated circuit design, kind of aligning with the demands posed by electronic journalism or electronic news gathering. People wanted to be out on the streets, recording events as they happened, and to get this video up to FCC or broadcast standard, it would need to be corrected. But whether the systems were analog or digital, they all shared one principal element, and that is a video store or delay. So jittery video lines are input into some form of memory, and then they're released with time precision. So the early digital models could store a single line of video, which was a major step up from analog systems. But then soon 2 lines became common, then 16, then 32, then so-called infinite window TBCs. But more important than how TBCs function internally is how you as a user can learn to best control them, taking advantage of all of the features that they offer to make the kinds of smart but significant adjustments that can really improve the quality of the video that you're digitizing. So with that, I'm going to turn off screen share, hand it over to Morgan, and let him take over. But I'll be back for talking later.
All right, so I'm gonna kind of rewind a little bit. I really appreciate Ben talking about the history of TBC. One quick note, this is a lot of stuff like that I hear is stuff that like I've heard someone say and maybe apocryphal, but I do remember somebody saying something along the lines of that the original quad decks were just a transport on a washing machine sized TBC. So when you said that there's a TBC in there, it may just be that whole thing is the TBC essentially. Ben says no.
No, I'm telling you, it's called the CAVEC and the Color Tech or something. I can show you pictures.
Okay, so I'm going to rewind and talk about kind of like what an analog video signal is. As I mentioned earlier, I really think that this is really important, not just in understanding TBCs, but really in understanding, kind of decoding a lot of both time-based errors, general errors. In a sense, I've heard it said that all errors that we see in video are in fact time-based errors because this is a time-based medium. But we can dig into that a little deeper. But really, once you really fully understand how a video frame, how a video image is constructed, you start to understand why certain errors look the way they do, and then from there you can troubleshoot them a little bit better. And it also is true of kind of understanding how a TBC works. So I like to always start with this image here, mostly because this is sort of like our sort of meditative, our mantra, our om. It sounds like I'm kind of joking, but I'm actually quite serious. This is sort of like, as Ben had mentioned, there was the implicit understanding that video would not function as it had to meet FCC requirements, or to really just create a good picture without some sort of intervention. And that in Ben's model, it was the TBC is performing the intervention to make the tape that can be physically distorted running across pieces of rubber and metal that might be distorted through climates, through wear. This is all there was never the idea. The idea isn't that a perfect mechanism can reproduce video perfectly, but rather that a system with a series of mitigations can properly reproduce a video signal. And so the bars is sort of our way to do that. It's what we have all agreed upon. It looks a certain way. The tone sounds a certain way. There are other test patterns that are useful, but this is sort of the most familiar. And so this is what we use to get as close to perfect as we can, with the understanding that we won't be perfect because the system is inherently flawed. Again, I sort of make a joke about this, but I'm also serious. Really, when we're seeing this image, this is like the culmination of decades of broadcast engineers, technologists, and thinkers coming up with a way to essentially make a bunch of rocks vibrate at the right frequencies to create an image that we want to see on the television screen. It really is, video is, because of its history and its reliance on analog electronics, analog video is just really sort of humans' attempt to create images out of resources extracted from our earth and finding the harmony between those components. So I'd like to get heady for a second because it really is quite an interesting achievement that we've made. But diving into the actual anatomy of it, you may be familiar with the concept of video fields or interlacing. This image is basically just to show that an image of one frame of analog video is made up of 525 lines. And each of those, every other line belongs to a field. You have the even lines, or the odd lines are in the top field, the odd lines are in the top field and the even lines are in the bottom field. Every field is every other line. They code together to make an interlaced image. Now, the reason that you have to do this is because if the lines were drawn straight from top to bottom at the frame rate of 2997 frames per second, your eye would notice that it wouldn't be making a full image. It would look flickering. The top and the bottom of the frame would flicker. So in order to get around the fact that if you could have upped the frame rate, but that would be kind of more expensive computation, higher bandwidth, and so they kind of wanted to keep it lower, but still make an image properly rendered. So they do every other line, and that's the story of interlacing. It needs to be that way. And talking within the realm of analog video, it needs to be that way for us to properly render an image and actually see it as an image rather than a series of lines that are being drawn on the screen. So just to kind of drive that home, here we have the odd field and the even field coming together to make a full field. This really should say odd field, even field, both fields, or odd lines, even lines, all lines. It's a little bit of a mistake I'm realizing on this slide, but I hope that makes sense. I'm going to keep using this image a little bit just because it's a funny clip from a music video I made. So you may be familiar with this sort of image of interlacing where if the fields are misaligned or you're viewing an interlaced video on a computer screen, you see this kind of tearing, this little interlacing. Whether or not this is an error or a problem depends on the system and depends on sort of the environment that you're viewing it in. So to kind of, a lot of times this kind of gets hand waved away, but if you've ever been confused about this, what's happening is when we digitize a video, the video signal that is on a tape, we are trying to preserve every single aspect of the video signal that was on the tape, like both like the actual image, the sound, the frame, as well as the composition of the video signal itself and the organization of the data on the tape. And on the tape, the information is organized as a series of fields and lines. And so it's interlaced. So we are preserving that in the file that we save, in the preservation file that we create, because it is, as archivists, we want to do no harm. We want to keep things as original as possible. And there's, certain other reasons, technical reasons, but, we can just say like we are preserving it as is, and as is interlaced. However, computer screens, phone screens, these are all progressive. They're all progressive displays, which means that each frame is a solid image rather than a series of lines. And as a result, it can't display interlacing properly. That interlaced image, if you display it on a CRT or another sort of interlaced display, a CRT monitor, cathode ray tube monitor is an interlaced display, it will display the image properly and you won't see the errors. So when you see these lines, it's either because you have some sort of problem somewhere, or it's more likely that the video file hasn't been properly prepared for the display that you're viewing it on. And so, yeah, my point is to say, like, if you see interlacing lines in a video, it's not that it's wrong, it's that it's kind of not jiving with its environment properly. That's why when we create, an access copy, we de-interlace it, which is essentially a mathematical formula that it goes through that kind of nudges the lines together and makes it a progressive image rather than an interlaced image. But again, when you see these interlacing lines, you're kind of getting closer to the actual true organization of the data on the videotape. So kind of diving in further, that's looking at things as sort of a frame made up of fields. Diving in even further, this is what a video line looks like. And so there's 525 of these lines for every frame of video. And every frame of video has 9.97 times a second. So there are a lot of video lines in every second. I actually should have that number memorized, but I don't. And so this is going to take a second, and if this doesn't make sense, if you're looking at this like, how is this video, it'll start to come together, but I want to show that this is what it looks like. This is sort of this diagram here has all the parts. You've got the sync tip, you've got the color burst, and then you've got the active video. For what you see on your CRT screen or on your computer screen is the active video. When we digitize video, we are really only digitizing the active video with a little bit of the blanking area on both sides, but you're really just digitizing the active video. That portion that says horizontal blanking, that's what makes the video work in an analog space. A digital space doesn't need that. So somebody made the decision at some point that was not to be digitized, and it isn't digitized. But let's zoom in a little bit on this blanking area. And this blanking area consists of two major sections. There's the sync tip and the color burst. And the sync tip is a portion where the video signal, sorry, I actually didn't make this clear. This is what a video line would look like if you were viewing it on a waveform monitor, which is basically to say that if the line is low, it is dark or closer to black. And if the line is high, it is closer to white or brighter. This portion of active video that you're seeing is as if this was essentially a gray screen, a flat line sort of in the middle is gray. If it was all the way up, it would be white. If it was all the way down, it would be black. So when we zoom in on the sync tip, the line goes down, it drops down. That is a portion that is supposed to be 4.7 nanoseconds long, a 4.7 nanosecond long portion of the video line where it is down far enough, -20 IRE, down far, and that essentially is a place where your equipment, your TBC, your monitor, your playback equipment knows that that's where the line starts. And really the equipment is lining up all the sync tips to be in the same place. It's sort of an alignment, and that's where the video starts. After that is the color burst, which is an oscillating wave that tells the system, hey, this is color, this is NTSC. It essentially, a color in video is a series of kind of waves that are tuned to certain frequencies, and certain frequencies generate certain colors. So this color burst is telling us, hey, I want you to sync up to the system at this frequency, so they can so the system knows, hey, essentially it's like a password. It's like, hey, are you color? All right, is this the correct frequency? Yes. All right, we're going to generate NTSC color for this line. So again, your horizontal blanking area is a sync tip, which is used to align the line, and then the color burst, which is used to align the colors. So put it all together and you make a frame. So this image at the top, this kind of gray and green and black thing, is what an entire frame of video looks like with the horizontal blanking on the left and the vertical blanking at the top. I didn't talk about the vertical blanking. I will hand wave that away. But if you look at the bottom, you can see sort of an illustration of a video line, the same illustration that's here, but it's lined up with what it looks like in a video frame. So if you were to look at the whole frame made up of 525 of these video lines, you see that black line is where the sync tip drops down and is blacker than everything else. And then the color burst section is green, and that's just because that kind of the frequency that the color burst is at generates green on your screen. And then there's that gray section of active video, and that can really just be any video. So this is like, I understand if you're like, this doesn't make any sense. I've never seen this black line. I've never seen this green line. It's kind of, how is this here? Have we been missing this whole time? The answer is it's actually been hidden by how the CRT generates the image. So on the left, you've got the color bars that we talked about, our nice little mantra, our ohm. And then if you press a button on your monitor that's called HV delay, which is essentially delaying when the line shows up on the screen, you can actually see that sync tip and that color burst there. So if you've ever hit the HV delay button on your monitor, I'm like, what am I looking at? This is referred to as the pulse cross. But what you're seeing, so you can't shrink down the image on your screen, and you can't make the screen bigger to show it. So really the only way you can see it is by moving it over. And that's what we've done in the second image. We've moved it over, and that black section is the sync tip, that green section is the color burst, and then everything else after that is the active video. So to picture this back with our sort of gray screen and our sort of model, this is what you see. You see on the left, you've got the line starting with the sync tip, the color burst, and then the active video. On the right, it's slightly delayed. So you have some of the active video, the sync tip, color burst, and then the rest of the active video. Ben and Siobhan, is this jiving for you? I know you know some of this, but I hope that this kind of, let me know if I need to clarify any of this.
No, it's good. Keep going.
Okay, thank you. So now we're getting back to like, what do TBCs do? Sort of, as we said, would be the point of it, but I really wanted to give you all of that sort of background of the anatomy. So if you got a signal off a tape that looked like the left, where all the lines are jumbled up and they're not perfectly in alignment with each other, the purpose of the TBC is to hold on to each line until it is the right time for that line to be released so that they are all lined up properly, and it uses the sync tip to do that. So as you can see on the left, the image is all jumbled. On the right, the image is nice and square. The TBC is lining up the sync tip of every line so that they're lined up and you get a nice perfect image. Now, not always do you get a nice perfect image because sometimes the TBC can't figure it out for a number of issues. But this is sort of like the platonic concept of what a TBC is doing to generate a good image from a not so good image. Okay, that's actually like that's my big kind of reveal there. I hope that kind of jives. So now I'm going to move on to sort of like what are these different things. So that is what a time-based corrector is supposed to do. What is a frame sync or a frame synchronizer? So back in the old days, a TBC the size of a microwave could only store one line at a time. Essentially, there's a it's the silicon chips memory, the kind of I believe is it Moore's law, the idea that computers get 2 times as fast every so many years, get 2 times as powerful. We've had a lot of time to be able to create big systems that can store data and can store information, very large amounts. But back in the 70s and the 60s, they weren't able to do this. They had to use a lot of components and a lot of electrical components and silicon to essentially just store a single line. And the point of the TBC was, hey, store that single line and then release it when it's the correct time to release it. Again, hold on to it and then release it at the time to make that sync tip line up properly. So, even storing one line was a huge step forward. But eventually, as electronics improved, you were able to store more and more information. So it went from 2 lines to 4 lines to 8 lines to 32 lines. And as Ben had mentioned previously, when you got to the point of being able to store an entire frame, it was referred to as an infinite window TBC. So a frame synchronizer, essentially what it's able to do is there is a distinction between an infinite window TBC and a frame sync, but for the purposes of this presentation, understand that a TBC in general is a device that is holding on to some number of lines, depending on when it's from. It's holding on to some number of lines, aligning those lines, and then doing that very quickly every time the lines and the frames are passing through the TBC. A frame synchronizer actually holds on to an entire frame and then waits for the correct part for the correct time to release that frame. And this allowed for a lot of things. It allowed for technology to become more lightweight and for basically frame synchronizers to be just essentially the fact that we were being able to hold more information with smaller components allowed us to create amateur video. They started to expand who could create video and how they could do it and how much it would cost to do so. But also it allowed things like the kind of classic example of the frame synchronizer is you're at a football game. If you're watching a football game and there's the blimp flying around up there and there's the cameras that are in the seats, the actual time delay that it would take for the feed to come from the blimp down to the control room is much longer than it would take for the camera and the seats to go to the control room. But if they want to switch between the cameras and the seats and the camera and the blimp, they have to be lined up. The frames have to be starting at the same time. They have to be lined up. And in order to do that, you can use a frame sync to make sure that that essentially each frame is starting and ending at the same time. So there is like this concept like which is better. Do I want to use a frame sync? Do I want my video signal to go through a frame sync? Do I want my video to go through a TBC? I kind of had this like image here as a concept of an anachronism. We do sort of have to think about there is a lot of people talk about, when you're playing back a tape, you want to play it back in as close to the original environment as possible, because that would kind of create the most true or the most true signal or the most true representation of the signal that is recorded onto the tape. However, we don't always have access to the same deck that the tape was recorded onto or the same TBC that was used. So we have to kind of make do. Then also, do you want to use a TBC that is contemporaneous to the time that the content was created, or do you want to use something more modern? Something more modern has more bells and whistles and may reproduce the picture better, but it might not be as true. I know that there's a lot of talk as archivists about not doing too much intervention and kind of mitigating the amount of intervention that one does when reproducing an image, especially on tape or film. I will say, as having worked with this equipment for a long time. I think there is sort of, we have to be realistic about what we can do. We don't have that many TBCs from the era of the tapes that were digitized. At BAVC, we have Sony BVT 800, which is a real TBC. I think it has about 16 lines of storage. And the difference the difference in the image that TBC can generate is actually really good. It looks very transparent. It does a really great job, but it really can't handle more complex errors the way a frame synchronizer can, the way a more modern device can. So really, you got to use scopes, you got to use monitors, and you got to use your eyes and trust what you're seeing when you're trying to choose. And this is sort of why at BAVC we hoard this equipment, and we have a ton of TBCs and a ton of frame syncs and a ton of equipment, because you really need to be able to try different things to really have know what is better. So I'm going to move on next to what a proc amp is, or a processing amplifier. So most TBCs contain a proc amp, but they are not interchangeable, and I would suggest that you do not use the terms interchangeably. There are standalone proc amps, there are TBCs without proc amps. A processing amplifier allows you to adjust parameters of a video signal, to adjust essentially the levels, it's adjusting the levels. It's like turning the volume up or down, but it's more complex than that. There's typically 4 parameters that are available on all proc amps. There are other adjustments that can be made as well, but these are the main 4. We've got video, chroma phase, and setup. There are, again, in order to make this more difficult and confusing for everybody, there are multiple sort of terms that can be used for each of these items. So video can be Luma, video, or level, or something else even. Black can be black, setup, or contrast. Chroma is typically chroma. I don't see too much else in that. And then phase can be hue, phase, chroma phase. I'm going to get into what each of these does. So if you're not sure what these do, I'm going to give some examples of that. There are TBCs without proc amps. Ben kind of gave this example earlier with the Panasonic AG1980 and the Sony BBU 950. These have TBCs in them, but they do not have a proc amp. So there is some electronics inside of these decks that are making sure that the image is rendered as best as possible, but you don't have the ability to change the levels on it. So I want to drive home the point that, like, if you see those proc amp settings on a deck, you can be fairly certain there's a TBC in there, and you know that there's a proc amp in there. But if you don't see that stuff on a deck, that doesn't mean there's not a TBC in it. And in fact, the 950 has like a really awesome TBC that can make a picture look really, really good, but you can't adjust the levels on it. There are proc amps without TBCs. These are usually kind of cheaper, more affordable, but this is simply a device that you can put a video signal through to adjust the levels, just how bright it is, how dark it is, how much contrast the colors, or how much saturation the colors have, and the hue. Oh yeah, chroma, also referred to as saturation. Sorry, I just left that one out. Then there are TBCs that do have proc amps. So on the left is a 575. This is a frame synchronizer TBC unit. It also digitizes the signal and creates an SDI signal out of an analog signal. And those buttons on the right are where you make the proc amp adjustments. On the top right is the Pixie FS. I believe that this is used at DCPL and the MemLab network. And this has a little mode button that you can press, and you can switch through the kind of modes, which are contrast, brightness, saturation, hue, and then you can use a button to increment or increase or decrease the level. So it's a little bit of a goofier interface, but trade-off is that the unit is small. But this is a TBC that has a proc amp built into it. And then on the bottom right is our classic SVHS deck, the Sony SVO 5800. Really great deck. Has become very expensive in the last year. Went from being about $800 a deck to $2,500 a deck. And these have, in the bottom right, you can see video, setup, chroma, hue. There's also a switch on the bottom on this one that you see says bypass local and remote. So that will actually bypass the proc amp settings on it. If you put on bypass and then remote, you can control it through some sort of remote hookup, which we don't have. Local means local to the unit. So there's a lot of different ways that proc amps show up on TBCs or show up in equipment in general. Kind of my point with this is to just say that the proc amps are different than TBCs. And you really shouldn't say, hey, I'm adjusting the TBC levels. You should say I'm adjusting the proc amp levels. Most people will understand what you mean. It's not really a matter of like being not able to understand what you're talking about, but it is really good to understand that these are different portions of circuitry. These are different devices essentially that are just kind of together in one device rather than being one thing that does everything. So now I'm going to get to setting levels. How much time do we have? Are we supposed to end at 1? I want to make sure I don't go too long.
Oh no, we have until 4:30 really for the total.
Sorry, 1 my time. Okay, so we're going to get into setting levels. This is kind of the point of the proc amp. I want to give everybody an opportunity to see what this does and see how it affects the signal. So for every single one of these examples, there's going to be the image on the top of the bars, and then below it is the waveform view. As I was talking about before, the higher the line, the more white it is, and the lower it is, the more black it is. And then on the bottom right is the vector scope, which shows the colors. And when that gets wider, the colors are more saturated, and as it becomes more kind of centered, the colors are less saturated. So this is me adjusting the black setup or pedestal. This is typically the first adjustment that one makes, because as you turn it up, it moves the entire waveform up and down. So the brightest becomes more bright, the darkest becomes more bright as you turn it up. The colors, the chroma is not affected by this. It's just kind of it's referred to as the contrast. It's referred to as the pedestal because it's the bottom part being raised. Next is the Luma, or the video level, or the whites level. This, as you can see, is different than the pedestal. When you raise the level on this, you actually are you're stretching out from the top. So it doesn't affect the bottom level. It only affects the top level. So the higher you have it turned up, the more dynamic range you have, essentially. But if you go too high, you'll clip. So you can kind of see everything gets really washed out as I turn it up. I'm going to show this GIF again. You see the waveform going all the way up, and things are clipping at the top and becoming very washed out. In this example, the chroma levels are changing too. The saturation is changing. That is not always the case. There are some proc amps where raising the Luma level will increase the chroma saturation, and there's some where it doesn't. This just happens to be one where it does. Next, we are adjusting the chroma. So as you can see in this example, as the chroma gets lower and lower, the colors become more and more washed out and desaturated. There you go. It goes real down, and they kind of get desaturated, and it's going to pop back up, and the colors will become more saturated. We have on the bottom right the waveform targets, those little green squares. The inner squares are really where you want the colors to end up when you're setting your levels. But this is just, I want to show you this what chroma looks like. And then hue or phase. And so as we adjust the phase or the hue, you can see the waveform, the vector scope actually rotates, and then the colors are changing. This is kind of my favorite one to look at. I really like when it's all the way to the right. On the left, you get these kind of like 70s, like earth tone colors. And then when it rotates to the left, and then when it rotates to the right, you get these cool like pastel, like 80s, like jazz pop colors. But it's got to be, if you want it to be correct, it's got to be our standard SMPTE color. So
I recently had this vision of making like a compass necklace that was the actual vector scope, and something would be north and you could like use it. Does someone want to work with me on making that?
Sounds like you have to find some Etsy sellers.
I need some Etsy work.
I'll just buy.
Yeah, so the point of this is just to show this. So this is what the proc amp settings are kind of doing under the hood. If you've messed around with the proc amp without looking at a scope, you may have noticed, yeah, you can make things brighter, darker, more saturated, less saturated, change the colors. This is sort of the under the hood, what is going on with the proc amp. So we can use scopes to correctly set levels. On the left, this is what your waveform monitor should look like when you are have your level set correctly. And on the right is what your vector scope should look like. This isn't really a scopes class. I'm not going to go too much into it. I just wanted to mention this.
And I just want to throw out in there that we don't have scopes as part of the memory lab. Or because also a lot of times home movies don't have color bars at the beginning of them to set them or anything. But this can be useful in making sure that if you have something with the proc amp, you could make sure that it's not, the whites aren't like blown out. It's just like those real extremes, right? Like, so you can still visually, if it looks like the whites are like really hot and bright and you're losing details, you can, you know, turn it down, and that way you're not losing any information, if that makes sense, hopefully.
Yeah, I have examples of that too coming up, which should help. This is, you know, it's like I wanted to tune this presentation to the memory lab, but then it's just sort of like, oh yeah, you know, you don't have bars on the home movie stuff. I think it's cool if you can like find a way to get somebody to record you a bars tape, to have that just to sort of like practice and do that calibration and kind of get familiar with it. But this is, if you're using vrecord, are you using vrecord?
Not right now, just use the Black Magic, because we have one partner that uses a Windows, and we might have more than one, which I know you can't use vrecord, but I do hope to incorporate it maybe into other future labs.
I feel like that's the grant project we've been talking about for years now. I think we need to make it happen.
Yeah.
Someone needs to support like making vrecord a little bit easier to use.
Mm-hmm. On multiple, on Windows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is what the levels would, correctly set levels would look like on vrecord, on the vrecord digital scopes. It's like wanted to show that. So this is sort of like, if you're just doing stuff to content, this is what it's going to look like. So on the left, I'm clipping the Luma. You can see it's totally washed out, and especially look in the window near the center of the frame. You can see that as you turn the levels down, you can start to see actual details of the outdoors come into focus. If you have the Luma set too high, those details are entirely lost. You can't render them. You can't see them later in the digital file by readjusting the levels. They're just completely, the details are completely lost. On the right, it's the same but with crushed blacks. Is as you go too dark, as you set the pedestal too low, you're losing all of the details that are dark. And as you raise it up, you can start to see them again, and see that you actually, if you had set those levels too low, you would lose entirely what is in the shadows. Chroma amount and hue shift. So on the left, this is from the young ones. I don't know if anybody knows this British comedy show that I have VHS tapes of for testing stuff. You can, as you turn the chroma down, it becomes almost like it's like a black and white recording. And as you turn it up, things start to get more saturated. So with this, the worry is that if you have the chroma too high, you can actually clip the chroma, and you kind of lose the ability to have sort of a dynamic range in the colors. Also, if you go too low, you could, after the fact, sort of expand the saturation a little bit in the digital space, but you're going to lose kind of a dynamic range there. So you really want to have it set so that skin tones are natural. You don't want people to be kind of glowing orange, but you also don't want people to look like they are pale and have never left their house. An interesting thing, I actually took this out, I think, of this presentation, but it's worth mentioning now in the spirit of kind of just like inclusivity and diversity. There is, if you look in the bottom right, there's these 4 little boxes, and you can kind of, there's 4 red boxes, or you can't really tell if they're red, but there's 4 boxes. And as I'm raising the chroma, you can see a line that sort of juts out and kind of matches those lines. It's often referred to as the skin tone line. And interestingly enough, the skin tone line is the same for most people across skin color, melanin content, race, because the thing that makes your skin a color is the blood under your skin, and blood is the same color for everyone. Nice little moment of like inclusivity for the video field. You can't always set the skin tone line and have it be correct, simply because there is variance in, you know, just the colors of people's faces and their skin. But in general, it's actually a fairly good guess, regardless of how much melanin somebody's skin has. So it's just an interesting fact. I like that. So then you've got the hue shift on the right. As you can see, the skin tones become purple when they're to the left, and people's skin becomes purple magenta if you have it too far to the right, and it becomes green and yellow if you have it too far to the left. So generally, when you're setting skin tones, you kind of want to be, okay, not too yellow and not too magenta. You kind of want to get the kind of pinkish hue. Okay, so that's setting levels. I'm going to take a second to talk about timing. There are timing adjustments that can be made on proc amps as well. As we mentioned, video is a time-based media, and there's all this timing built into the anatomy of the video signal, the sync tip and the color burst. So one thing that you can change is the horizontal position. You can see the image is kind of moving to the left and the right in the frame, and you want to set this to make sure that you're not cutting off the frame on the right or the left. What's interesting about this is that when you're making this adjustment, you're actually adjusting how the amount of delay between the sync tip and the active video. So this is actually a timing adjustment that looks like it's moving the image left and right. Here's just it with some content. We got the Erica Baidu tape for Ben's enjoyment. This one is a little bit easier to kind of understand. You're moving the center, the kind of registration of the frame to the right and left. There's also the concept of YC delay. I want to mention this because this is something that we're starting to do a lot more at BAVC. It's maybe hard to see with this GIF, but what's actually happening here is the color, the chroma information is being moved, but the luminance information is not being moved. And so you can see that more clearly if you look at the white square on the bottom left, and you notice that the white square is not moving to the left or the right, but the color bars are moving to the left and right. And I have these images on the right that are kind of like your printer registration targets, because this isn't the same thing, but as an analogy, it functions. That really, when you're setting the YC delay, you're setting the registration of the chroma with the luminance information. Here's a little bit more of a cool Erica Baidu tape is really great for this because you can see the colors on her outfit, and as I move the YC delay to the left and right, you kind of see that glow that's around her. So if you ever find yourself having a tape that has this weird kind of glow or halo around the people or bright colors, that can actually be fixed usually by adjusting the YC delay. Just a really quick, I wanted to talk about this earlier, and I just put it here. Video signal is made up of luminance and chrominance. So you've got your black and white, and then you've got your colors. They're separate parts of the signal. They're mashed in together in the kind of analog signal. But this image on the left that has colors, has like an image, is actually made up of this kind of white and black segment, and then this color segment. This is what it kind of looks like with color bars versus an image, but really when you're adjusting the YC delay, you're adjusting how those line up because you kind of move the colors around. It can be very helpful. We get tapes that come in sometimes that have just straight off the tape aren't properly registered, like don't have proper registration, and you have to actually make that registration happen to make the image look better. And then this is just, I'm kind of wrapping up here, but I just wanted to show that this is sort of what a TBC looks like in a signal path, as Ben had shown. You've got your deck. We'd like to use scopes, but you'll go from your deck to your time-based corrector to your monitor. You can also, actually, this is not a really good example for you guys, but you can view, if your monitor or your scopes have multiple channels, you can actually view, what we like at BAVC to do is show on one monitor what the image looks like before the TBC and then what it looks like after the TBC, and you're actually able to see kind of a wide difference and seeing what the TBC is actually doing. This is if your deck has two outputs, which your decks may not. And just now I'm going to go through some examples of what it looks like to put a TBC, an image through the TBC on the right. We have a half-inch open reel tape with no TBC, and on the left we have that going through a DPS 290, which is a frame synchronizer. And you can see the image is a lot more stable. I mean, it's like actually makes an image. So here's just some more stuff. I had a really, really problematic collection from NYU, and these, like, the different TBCs, the tapes were very screwy, and the different TBCs had sort of different ways of fixing it. And so you can see on the left, it is a little bit more stable in general, but there's this really bad error at the top, where on the right, it's the image itself is mostly breaking up and not super. You can kind of see that white line on the left side is more stable throughout the bottom portion of the left frame, and is unstable throughout most of the portion of the right frame. Here's another fun one where the BVT makes a really nice stable image, but near the bottom of the frame, it's like jumping up and down and kind of almost looks liquidy, versus the 290 is jittery and has, it's kind of hard to tell in the GIF, but is jittery and has like sort of poor registration. Same with this one. So this is just to show that sometimes you'll have a tape that's so bad that you simply do not have a good answer, and you just have to try everything until you have one that you like.
And Morgan, in this case, you tried sending the signal through multiple TBCs and got no better results?
No, that didn't help with these tapes. That can help. We can chat about that, but in this case, that didn't help at all. These tapes had a really, really weird recording on them. A lot of really weird errors that seemed to be connected to the poor electricity in the room they were recorded. Because when they turned the lights brighter, the problems would get worse. And so just more thoughts, parting thoughts about using TBCs. The more you have around, the more you can try. They are necessary. I actually should have mentioned that, but yeah, they are necessary because they're really expected to be in a signal path, in a professional signal path. They're expected to be used, and the equipment that we use for digitizing is generally professional equipment that is, again, expecting a professional signal path. There's usually a trade-off somewhere, and as shown with these images, there's not a perfect answer. It's all about mitigation. It's all about getting as close to perfect as possible, but different TBCs are going to do that differently, and you're going to lose some details with one that you gain with another. And also, when in doubt, use your eyes. In the end, this content is going to be viewed by people like you and I, and whether or not it looks good or bad, it's going to be something that you can kind of become confident in assessing yourself using your own eyes. Okay, that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. Extremely helpful and like covers so many issues and topics I feel like that are we've touched on a little bit, and then I think it's also just good to reiterate, but then absolutely that like bringing in of the active video too. Like I'm so glad you covered that because I think that that's sometimes something that we forget about, like how different when you digitize an analog signal, like how different it actually is from the original. Even though we're trying to get it as close to the original, it's actually like we're missing a lot of information that we don't necessarily need. But and that's really why, like when you talk about like NTSC video, it's like 525 lines, and then you come out with a digital video that is 720 by 486, which is like sometimes the math, it's like, what are we actually we're not actually capturing like all 525 lines, right? Yeah.
Right.
I was just thinking yesterday that same question, like how could you explain in like a tweet length why we digitized a 486 but 525 is NTSC standard? And I was like, I don't know. It does get complicated.
I don't know. I assume that
it's like in that short digest kind of form, but
yeah, I think just the decision was made at some point, and that's what it was. I have seen some like equipment and formats that can capture the entire vertical and horizontal blanking area, but it's like so rare and barely supported. Nobody seems to do it.
I think they do it a little bit more in Europe, possibly.
Probably. I think it's interesting. If you were able to, it's, I think it's the kind of thing, it's kind of like the environments and the expectations and the use cases. Like in most of the people who are doing like professional, people who are creating these digitization tools expect like a good signal to go in, and haven't considered that like archival stuff isn't going to look good and there's going to be all these problems. So they're like, well, you don't need the blanking area to exist because you've got your signal already reconstructed, and then you're good. But of course, when the signal isn't properly reconstructed, it sure would be useful to have the blanking area there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's very much all about like what is available to you, and what is, cost prohibitive and what isn't, I mean, that's always the kind of like quintessential challenge and dilemma of doing this work. So I mean, my question to you, Siobhan, is like, TBCs in use at different memory lab locations, does it vary? Is the Pixie like a standard thing that's being used? How many different locations are there?
Well, there will be 14 in the memory lab network. So where we do require that we purchase an external TBC, at least for the moment, because it still fits within our budget. Mm-hmm. But initially we had everyone buying, you remember that TVC1 that was out there? I mean, it was only going for like $200, $300 or something like that. And
They stopped making it though, right?
They stopped making it. So then that's when I was like, oh, I need to rethink this, and found the Pixie FS, which still, the main thing is I really want S video. Right. To, you know, that's I feel like that's a good middle ground, especially since we're very focused on VHS and SVHS. So yeah, so that was sort of like what I was obsessing about, but we can't, you know, the Pixie FS right now is like $750.
Expensive, I saw, yeah.
Yeah, we can't go above that because we have a set budget. So, you know, we have to do this 14 times. So, or there's at least 5. I think we have at least 5 that are built right now. I see also that Suzanne says that they're setting up their lab in the next few weeks and need all the help they can get. So I wonder, Suzanne, if you could put, I'm pretty sure that I had on your list to pick the to buy the Pixie FS as the TBC external one. So yeah, I think some of them have the TBC one, the ones that got started early. Okay. And then the, but now everyone's we're gonna try and have the Pixie FS as a standard just for the memory lab, because it is in that middle ground. And I'm really glad that you said that up front about like, it's an imperfect system. Like, here's what it's supposed to be. You know, sure, we can look at color bars and be like, oh, this is yes, we're all trying to get back to the, you know, to that. But that there really is how you get there, and just like the fact that we're trying and that we're, you know, we are getting as far as we can, like I hope it's empowering for people in the Memory Lab network, and not that parallelization of perfectionism that we come up against all the time.
You don't want to get too precious about it. Like, I went to pick up a 1-inch tape machine that KQED in San Jose had for us at BAVC, and I had to rent a truck and get these guys to come down because this thing weighed like, I don't know, 1,000 pounds. I have no idea how big it is. It's huge. But we got down there and it's like, you flip the lid on it and it was like, people were putting out the engineers were like putting out their cigarette butts like on the machine, you know? And it's like, you know, like back in the day, people who were making video were, you know, it was just a job like any other. And, you know, maybe they didn't take it seriously. Maybe they did. But, you know, we come at it decades later acting like we're afraid to touch anything. And I think we need to kind of, you know, get rid of that kind of preconception.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. Completely. And that's the other thing. Oh yeah, go ahead, Morgan.
Oh, I was going to mention that the Pixie FS, I called the company Burst Electronics and just chatted for like 30 minutes about TBCs with the guy. And I was like, I want to ask you a question. Like, is this a frame sync or an infinite window TBC? And he was like, okay, 1 second, let me clear the cobwebs. And then like, we just chatted about it, and he ended up not having like a super clear answer on it, but he was like really easy to talk to, and was like, I was like, I work at a nonprofit, we do this stuff. And he was like, okay. And he sort of, he told me some really cool information. He mentioned that there are countries, so US has performed like the digital transition, but there are countries in this world that are developed nations that have not done a digital transition, and so you still may be able to get analog equipment and TBC type stuff from there, because people are still producing that stuff for those markets. So it's worth looking into.
Yeah. So, and is that what they're saying, that they like, that's why they're still manufacturing?
I know.
It can't be us. It can't be like archives.
They don't have the things, but they're all made to order. You know, you have to call up their vendor Marketech, and then they go, okay, sure, we'll put in the order, and there's a 4-week lead time because they have to build them by hand.
Right. Right.
Yeah, that's cool.
And this is not
cool though. You can't get them. You can't just like try one out.
Yeah, and that's also where, I imagine when we get like our second cohort, all buying them at once. That'll be fun. But yeah, the other thing about that one, I feel like I remember you saying something about the 8-bit, like it can only capture 8-bit. Is that right?
So it has an 8-bit frame synchronizer in it, but when it's converted from analog to digital. And then, so this is like one of those things. It's like, oh my God, what's going on here? So when we're doing digitization transfers, we do everything at 10-bit, because that was sort of decided that is what is the preservation standard, is 10 bits for video. What that means is you have 3 channels. You have Y, U, and V. You have the luminance channel and 2 chrominance channels. And each of those channels for each pixel has a 10-bit value. So each pixel can be 0 to 1024 in brightness, and then that is the same for the two chrominance channels, which not brightness or color. It's a little bit more complex than that. But that means for each pixel, there are 3 10-bit values that can be stored that create the sort of image of that single pixel. If you have 8 bits, you only have 256 values instead of 1024. So there's a much lower resolution, a much lower amount of nuance and contrast and dynamic range. That's why if you ever look and you see essentially you look at a sunset, and if you see a nice smooth gradient in the sunset, then you've got a nice high, high dynamic range. If you see stepping or the kind of pixelating in a sunset, that's where you're oh, this is a low, bit depth transfer or something like that. So that's why we capture at 10 bits. However, most of the equipment that we use that's frame synchronizers has 8 or 9-bit A to Ds inside of it, and then it comes back out analog again. And so it's we just don't. We have to kind of draw the line somewhere and say actually this is okay. It's fine. I was scared about the PixieFS because I think it actually is 9 bits. It says 8 bits in one part and 9 bits in another part, but I believe it's actually 9 bits. But I talked to Michael Angeletti at Stanford, and he's like, if you're using a DPS 295,
same thing, yeah,
same thing. So it's really you
have to keep in mind these things were built in the 70s or 80s. It's it didn't exist. I don't believe, or if it did, it was it would be absurd because you couldn't even have files that large.
Right, exactly. So one thought is. I think we could look at the Aja FS2, which is a dual frame synchronizer. It costs $4,000 or $4,500. That's an option if you want to make sure it's 10 bits, but that's not really in our budget, right? So put one on the wish.
Something we haven't talked about, Morgan, which you explicitly said we shouldn't talk about in the presentation proper, is this question of should your TBC be your analog to digital converter? And I think it's at least worth raising this topic in this kind of part of this, because for me, this has become such an important thing. And back when I worked at BAVC, I loved having a whole bunch of different analog or early digital TBCs and playing around with them. And the output of them was always going to be an analog signal, right? What we were just talking about. But there are these late generation TBCs like the DPS 575, where you can input analog video, but output digital video and connect that directly to your A to D converter. And there are really good reasons to consider going in that direction. It may not be possible for the memory lab given the lack of availability of equipment, but by being able to send a video signal into a late gen DPS 575, you can also do things like sending the analog audio in, and then you can combine the two and send out an embedded SDI signal that has the audio and the video together, which would reduce in a major way all kinds of audio sync issues and other things that I think you might be encountering at memory lab locations if you don't have another mechanism of dealing with those kinds of things.
I'm a huge, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, that I've never played with the 575. So that's where I was always wondering, can you do audio too?
You can, it's a little, that's what Morgan was showing in that other video, right? But all it takes is you take a cable, you cut off the end, you get a soldering iron, you watch Morgan's video and you follow along. You definitely can do it. And for me now, I best possible results, but at NYPL, we're trying to just be consistent and do our work. It's you need to always be thinking about what the potential sacrifice might be if you're working in one way versus the value of working in a different way. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but for me now, I'm much more about getting SDI into the computer because I don't trust the Blackmagic capture cards that we use to do the conversion themselves, because Blackmagic as a company, they only care about the most modern type of video being produced, right? They make these devices, but they don't really care about you. And so there could be all kinds of problems that you might encounter. And I just, in my experience, I've grown tired of it. And for me, it's just much more important to just get the SDI and send it right in.
So that would be using Aja.
Yeah,
that would be another option.
Yeah.
You could definitely disagree with this, though.
I think here, but I mean, this is a round table. This is a 3-hour-long roundtable discussion, in my opinion. But it's good to talk about if you if you want to just have a Blackmagic card, if you want to use Blackmagic so you can use vrecord, you have a lot more options, and it's a lot cheaper if you just get one that has the SDI in, and you just do the conversion to SDI upstream. There's a bunch of different reasons that can be problematic. For example, the 575 has problems with its S-video input. So if you want to use S-video, you can't use that option. Or whatever. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. There's problems. There are certain beta, like digibeta decks, that if you play an analog with a beta SP tape in a digibeta deck, the SDI output is gnarly also. And so in those cases, we take the component signal out of the beta deck and then go into the component input of the 575 and then do the SDI conversion there. There's like, this is one of these things where it's like, there's like the platonic idea of what's supposed to be correct, and then there's just like all the equipment is broken in some weird way, and so you just have to figure out what it is. And that's why tools like QC tools.
There also might not be like a perfect solution, right? It's like, I'm pretty invested in DPS 575s. I know that they have this S-video problem, and we just don't do it, right? So it's like, I'm cool with composite most of the time, and it's like maybe if we had like something that we knew was like a really true component VHS recording, we would like try to come up with an alternative, but it gets complicated,
What we generally do is with the 575s, also what you mentioned with like multiple TBCs, the 575 does have a TBC in it that you can turn off and use it just as a frame sync and not as a TBC and a frame sync. And so what we do is we'll do the time-based correcting with a kind of more, if we're using U-matic, we use a DPS or a DPS 295 because that can separate the Y and the chrominance and the luminance channels from the U-matic for the dub out, and then can send a component signal out to the 575. So we can do all the levels adjustments and the color separation and the color timing at really good quality in one TBC, and then send it to the 575. And we just use the 575 at that point as a digitizer to make the SDI signal and combine it with the audio. This is a really complex topic. It really is just like, it's really fun to talk about, but I don't want to like scare people and be like,
I guess the question is, it's like, if you're trying to do things at the level of a dozen or 14 different, and you want consistency across the board, how can you make smart equipment purchasing recommendations and decisions, knowing that even the secondhand market is completely unpredictable, and you could spend years trying to find 14 of any one of these things. I don't know if there's really an answer to that necessarily, but
my suggestion would be Aja, I think they say AJA actually, whatever. AJA, they have a device that will take analog video in either YC or YCBCR and audio in and turn it into an SDI signal. Yeah. And that's a really reliable unit. They're $700 new, but you get them used pretty cheap usually. The problem with those units is that they have to have a really strong sync, or it drops frames. And the way it drops frames is it cuts to black. Some people seem to care about this. I've sort of like, what? You lose 3 frames in a 4-hour-long video. Who cares? Like those frames were goofed in the first place. That's why it dropped them. So, but a lot of people prefer for the failure modality to be that it repeats the last frame and then it doesn't look so much like an error. I'm getting to the point where if 575s become completely unavailable, which they are, and all my 575s break, which they're going to do, I might go back to this AJA device and simply tell people, that 3-frame chunk of black is simply because the video lost sync and it was like that on the tape.
I mean, I think like bright green would be harder to explain to anyone, including clients. Black is a little bit more.
But yeah, so that's an option because the device costs $700 new. That's a pretty penny. But then you can buy like the $50 SDI Blackmagic in, and you don't need to worry about it. It's just $50 for the Blackmagic in, or it's like $100.
Well, actually, it's funny that you say that because we have had to rethink things because we were using the Blackmagic Intensity Shuttle. And so we have a few that have that, but then guess what? Blackmagic is no longer manufacturing those either. So I had to come up recently with a workaround for that, and it's sure now they do have this option of this other like all-in-one box converter, but then it's like the audio was weird to me. There was just it was too expensive and not giving me what I wanted, you know? It was like
I'm using the Ultra Studio HD Mini a lot, and it has analog audio and analog video inputs. The problem here is that the only connection to the computer is Thunderbolt 3.
Yeah.
And so here's where Blackmagic is really screwing you, in that and it doesn't work with a Thunderbolt dongle either, right? It has to be a new Mac computer that has a Thunderbolt 3 to power the device, because there is no separate power. So it's like you can move in that direction. They're $495, they're pretty reasonable, but you would need all new Mac computers to make this happen, which I guess you could say is a little bit more reasonable now that there's M1 Mac minis that cost like $600, and that baseline model really should be good enough for digitization work. But you know, it's just, if you're like putting all of your energy and investing in this Blackmagic Apple world, like you're going to constantly be put up against the wall of having to get the newest thing, because their whole business model, it revolves around, you know, forced obsolescence of their own equipment. So
yes.
It's just a tricky thing.
And that's where we are. And yeah, that's where I'm just like trying to balance that out. And also we want to make these sustainable too. We want to, you know, this is a grant project that's going to be over in a few years, in like 2 years, less than 2 years. And then what? You know, part of it is like, how are we going to make this sustainable? Obviously, like it's not without people realizing they're going to have to continue to put money and time in, and you know, an effort, resources into keeping up a memory lab. But yeah, that's sort of like where I'm, as far as like time-based correctors go, at least too, because it is such hand in hand with like time-based corrector and the AD converter. And for us, at least like talking with you guys, and I'm interested just to maybe end on talking about like, okay, so one of the reasons why I want us to maybe get a Panasonic AG 1980 is or something that has like S-video potential and has an internal time-based corrector. Because just in case, what if in the near future soon, we can't buy the Pixie FS, or, you know, so I want to give people as many options as we can, but it's gonna decrease as much as possible. So we're sort of like, how can we give people?
I think the problem with a VHS deck that is prosumer, right, that has some of the bells and whistles of professional models, but plays the slow speed tapes that you know are going to be coming through a memory lab location, just because that's how we all recorded home videos. I think you're always going to have a bit of a challenge. Like the Panasonic's a great buy. I think that's a great machine, but it doesn't have a proc amp, right? We established that earlier. So it's like, that works for the time-based correction side, but what if people want to make small adjustments? Like, is that something that you just don't offer at that location? Or do you still insist on having the other TBC that's really just being used as a proc amp? Or do you buy a separate proc amp device? You know, it's like, it's a tricky thing. I don't know. I think the problem is I can't think of any other VHS models that would like offer that perfect sweet spot of having absolutely everything you need.
And
they don't exist. I think that's as close as it gets, honestly.
Right. And that's why we were kind of, you know, focusing on those. But then also like at this point now, especially as how expensive they've gotten, we're sort of just saying, can you get an SVHS deck? That would be great. And then make sure that you also have consumer decks, because, you know, a lot of times actually playing a consumer recorded tape in a consumer deck will be exactly what you need for that tape. So I
try not to get too like hung up on some of these things that maybe those of us who do the work all the time notice, because I think my parents took all of their home photographs, like all of our they took them down to Ritz Photo and they scanned them. They're like terrible quality JPEGs, but they're perfectly fine for my family, for us to enjoy like the actual memories that are the valuable part of those photographs. So I try to think of that and apply it to this world where obviously I'm so like immersed in the like technical details, and just think that like maybe it's okay if you don't have S video, or it's okay if like the S video is being a little messed up if you're using it, or you know, whatever other example you want to choose.
Absolutely. Again, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah, and that's where we really want it, like that's sort of our memory lab motto is more like we want to give people the information, help them understand it, and then you can make an informed decision, rather than just being like, just use this equipment, don't ask me questions. And then also like, we're gonna just have you do, I mean, which we do have people capture it at like 8-bit uncompressed MOV, but
Fine.
then we have them compress it. We have, you know, users compress it because nobody is gonna want, nobody can, that's just so unsustainable.
Totally.
So that's where it's like, but at least we're giving people the information and as many options as we can. That's sort of our, yeah, it's all you can do. And just at least like understanding and a better understanding what is all happening too, because all of these bits do play into like understanding an analog signal and the conversion to digital, that I think it's just knowledge is always, more knowledge is always better.
Totally.
So thank you all for sharing that. And then Jonathan says, that's the trade-off for their mobile lab that they started. They use a cheap consumer device for digitization, but the output leaves a lot to be desired. But it works, right?
Yeah.
Like it's better than folks not doing anything.
Yeah, definitely. That would be the real shame.
Yeah.
Just letting stuff deteriorate.
Yeah, and then I know a lot of our partners, some of the reasons why we chose them was because they're also in areas where there's a lot of like natural disasters like Jonathan's in California, and they've had fires and things like that, where it's just people are also like, they feel an urgency to transfer this stuff now. There's fires everywhere. Yeah. So thank you all. I guess we still have a minute. So I mean, if anybody has any questions, Jonathan or Steve.
Yeah, sorry, we just totally.
There's just so much to talk. I know. I'm like, I've got them here. I'm gonna ask them.
We're available at any time if anyone has any follow-up questions, whether like the two of you watching now or anyone later down the road. You know, we love talking about this stuff. So
reach out to us anytime for
sure. Thank you for that. Really appreciate. And thank you for your time and effort in this. And I'm sure I'll definitely be reaching out to you all for specific like thoughts in the future as things change, because I like every month I have to check the links and be like, is this being manufactured still?
Oh yeah.
It's rough.
It never ends.
Yeah, I feel like we could seriously have a 3-hour panel on like what is the most sustainable transfer setup. But yeah,
I think that's a really fascinating question.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think Mia just had a call for proposals, so.
I like it.
All right. Well, thank you again, and take care. And thank you all for coming. And I'll talk to you all later.
All right. Bye.